Neha, thank you for taking out the time to speak with ANI. There are quite a few things in the docket regarding critical minerals that we want to cover today. Let's start with what China has recently done. On October 9th, China, the world's largest producer of rare earths, expanded the scope of rare earth export controls. Can you break down this latest set of export controls for us? How are these measures any different from what we have seen in the past? And through these new controls, what message is Beijing trying to convey to Washington, especially since these export controls come just weeks ahead of the planned Trump Xi meeting in South Korea for later this month?
Right. First of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. These export controls are clearly, I mean, it has escalated with the tariffs, but it is clearly a retaliation to the semiconductor controls that US has imposed. And it is very strategically timing, like you mentioned, just weeks before the two presidents are supposed to meet, because this puts critical minerals on the leverage table. Now, what these export controls are is that, I mean, I'm going to just to put to context, I'm going to go a little bit back in time and talk about what happened earlier this year. So, when the tariff war started escalating in April, China decided to put an export control on seven medium and heavy rare earths. Now, these heavy and medium rare earths are used in very small quantities but are very critical applications. They're used everywhere in our daily lives. They're used in your speakers, in your phones, in your laptops, in your robots, but also in EVs, and have a strategic application in defense. Now, it was not a de facto ban, it is still not a de facto ban. It is just that anyone who's trying to export needed to apply for a license. Now, what happened in April is that after these export controls were imposed, neither of the parties were prepared for it, and there wasn't enough stockpile that was there that the producers have, because for the last 2 years the market has been severely oversupplied. Now, what happened is that no one was prepared and a lot of production was put to halt, because anyone who had to submit for a license had to wait for at least 45 to 60 days to get a license, and then only then they could export materials. Cut to chase, this there has been a lot of negotiations going on, and there has been a pause on the exports controls on paper, but on reality, on ground, things have been very different. The process has been the process has been blamed on bureaucratic lag, and things started getting better. And just now, before a few weeks before the presidents are supposed to meet, China has again come back with these export controls, saying that they've added more heavy rare earths to the list. But also this time there is going to be a license requirement for anyone who's trying to use any material that they're trying to re-import from China. So, say for example, some countries are taking in material, processing them, or making something out of them, and then re-exporting to some other companies, and they will also get affected. And even IP that is coming from China is going to get affected. Now, why this gets interesting is because IP, which is used for heavy rare earths, or a technology that is used for extraction of heavy rare earths, is very similar to this technology that is used to extract light rare earths. So even though technically it is not a ban, or not a restriction on all the rare earths, it transcends across everything and it spills across on everything. And then the end use applications of it are huge. But where things get interesting, or where things get strategic, is that a lot of these heavy rare earths are used in defense. The Tomahawk missiles, say for example, F-35s. Just an F-35 fighter jet, one of them, uses more than 400 kilograms of rare earths. A submarine uses 4.6 tons of rare earths. So, and they very clearly mentioned that this time, that even the last time and this time, the export restrictions are in place because they do not want to supply to any defense manufacturing organization. So any company who is manufacturing these missiles, these fighter jets, or linked to these will be affected. There will be no supply. And why this is critical? Because 95% of these materials come from China. So basically, everyone is dependent on China for a standing army. And we're
Right.
days, if not weeks, away from a crisis.
Right. So, given all that we know, and if you just take a step back right now, and from where you are sitting, how are you advising your clients on these Chinese export controls? Are you just telling them to wait it out till the two leaders meet in South Korea and maybe there is a deal on the table? Or are you thinking more long term that, look, this decoupling is here to stay and maybe it makes sense to diversify your procurement of, rare earth from other sources or like other countries as well?
So, in the short term, yes, we have to wait out to see what is going to happen. We're all looking forward to the meeting. But from what we see, these export controls are not going to go anytime soon. They're here to stay. And this is not across this is not just for rare earths, this is across all critical minerals. Because critical minerals are not just enablers of modern technology anymore. They're strategic tools, they're strategic leverage now. And these are tools for negotiation for any geopolitical turmoil. And for the long term, for the medium term, long term, yes, the best way to de risk yourself from such a situation is to either build your own supply chain, build your own ecosystem. Or if that is not possible, then diversify your sources as much as possible. The problem is now that the entire world is structurally dependent on China. And if China decides to stop material from coming out and they get to decide who gets what, then I mean everyone is basically just waiting for China to decide how their armies are going to work or how their technology development is going to work. Everyone's everyone's future growth is controlled from this one geopolitically concentrated supply chain. So and this is not the first time this has happened. This, just for rare earths, for an example, this happened back in 2010. There was a tension between China and Japan that happened, and China decided to stop exporting rare earths. In fact, even when they did start resuming their production, what happened is that they oversupplied the market so much that no other producer outside of China was able to break into the market because the market was so oversupplied, demand was not as strong as supply was, prices crashed. And any producer outside of China would need a certain threshold to break even into the market. And because China was producing at a very low cost and at very low prices, everyone just depended on China and just got their material from China. But this is not about just getting cheap material anymore. If you want a secure supply chain, if you want to make sure that these export controls do not affect you, diversify your sources as much as possible. Make sure, but also focus on building your own upstream, midstream, and downstream capacity.
Right. So the Japan example is quite interesting, right? Because we have a real life case study on how this essentially played out back in 2010. Why didn't like governments and the private sector, take that as, at that time like an area of concern that, look, we are extremely concentrated on this one country of supplying us with, critical minerals, rare earths, both heavy and light, and start diversifying at that from 2010 onwards. Like, why is it that, we had to wait till 2025 and seeing alarm bells being raised again?
That is because, I mean, yes, you see on the surface that yes, there's a lot of alarm bells being rung now, but we are far from actually making it happen anytime soon. These alarm bells have happened, but it's already too late. Like I mentioned, we are days away, if not weeks, from a crisis. And in 2010, when these happened, yes, there was a lot of noise around this, and a lot of developing producers came into the market. China's export restriction was challenged in the World Trade Organization,
Mhm.
and they had to start producing. They had to resume their exports. And because China is able to produce and grow their production at very low cost, and they have and they do not have that added burden of a capital return because they get all their funding from the state. It was very easy for them to grow, and for anyone who needed any material, they always got cheap material. They got access to cheap material. They've they've basically made everyone dependable on them. In fact, I'll give you an example. Rare earths was first actually it started production in the US in the 1980s. US was the major rare earths producer. But what happened? What happened is that there were such stringent environmental policies and not so supportive industrial policies that ultimately those companies either were shut down because of very strict licenses or lack of funding support, or they went bankrupt. Versus China had very flexible environmental policies. They were like, and rare earths mining or any critical mining essentially is a very dirty process.
Hmm.
It harms the environment a lot. So China gave that cushion that, okay, we are going to do the dirty work for you. You can come to us for the material. And now China has managed to grow that since 1980s till now. And cut to chase, now everyone is just heavily dependent on China.
I mean, is it fair to say that this was essentially just a labor cost and an environmental arbitrage that China just played on the West?
Essentially, kind of, yes. But also, China has always focused on building a manufacturing economy,
Hmm.
versus the West has always focused on building an IP economy,
Services, yeah,
or a
like
service
knowledge
based
economy,
economy.
right?
So, I mean, this is fundamental commodity economics. So whenever geopolitics is staged, whenever anything is at stake, it is always manufacturing is fundamental and manufacturing is key. So anyone who has that manufacturing power is going to thrive and gets to decide the fate of everyone else. And that's essentially what is happening right now.
Right. And I think you touched on this at the start. Like an interesting thing about critical minerals, rare earths, is that they are virtually used in every aspect of modern day life now, right? Like automobiles, EVs, smartphones, semiconductors, essentially anything that has like an on and off switch has some element of a rare earth powering it. Um, what impact will these export controls have on these, industries? Are there like any specific sectors that are likely to be hit the hardest? Just to throw out an example, in India, a couple of months back, the automobile manufacturers raised the point of like a shortage of permanent magnets, which could halt and even in some cases did halt production lines. So your thoughts on this?
You've pointed out the pain point accurately. So, e mobility is the largest demand driver for rare earths or most of the critical minerals. And that sector was hit the hardest when April export controls came into
Mm.
the picture. It was not because there was not enough material in the market, it was just that it was controlled from one point and it never made it to the consumers. So, because there was a because there was the export restrictions happened suddenly and exports suddenly stopped, there was a huge bureaucratic lag. Now hundreds of applications just came from European automobile manufacturers alone. And India, like you mentioned, India is also heavily dependent on China for its chips, for its magnets. And everyone started whistleblowing because they did not have access to magnets, and they were not prepared. They did not have enough stockpile. And I mean, at one point of time, we were talking to market participants in April and May, where we got an intel that there were only 5 people sitting in China approving hundreds of applications or thousands of applications rather. So you can imagine what the time lag would be. And yes, a lot of production lines came to a halt, although they were not directly affected. And there was always a speculation around what the end use of these magnets would be. So you had to submit like really long applications, and because of that, you had to reveal a lot of sensitive IP. because it ultimately made you had to reveal who you're supplying to, who your stakeholders are. And this has happened again this time. So they've made it very clear that if, I mean, they're obviously not going to supply to any defense manufacturing organization, but also if any company has more than 50% of equity of any organization that is related to defense will also get affected. Any technology company or any AI company or any semiconductor chip manufacturing company, which is going to be ultimately used for the research of human crisis or defense, will also get affected and will be under intense scrutiny. So basically, they've managed. So e-mobility is going to get affected. Consumer electronics is going to get affected. Defense is going to get affected. uh, Robotics is going to get affected. But not only just these, the semiconductor industry, the chip manufacturing industry, then your catalysts, phosphors, because the technology for for separating heavy rare earths is also applicable to light rare earths, and those light rare earths are used in have a lot of non-magnet applications: catalysts, phosphors, fluorescents. E-mobility is going to get hit the hardest in terms of there's going to be a lag, there's going to be a slowdown in the process, but ultimately that market is going to recover because they're not particularly targeting that market, or they're not restricting exports to that market. What is going to get affected the most is the defense manufacturing organization, although it accounts for a very small
Hmm.
sector of the demand. If you compare it with the grand scheme of things, it is a very critical application. I mean, we have intel that there aren't enough Tomahawk missiles left. There are empty cupboards now. So uh, the defense manufacturing organizations were looking for alternative routes, and that is where the second round of export controls come in, where they're not going to even allow re-import of Chinese material.
Right. So if you just take, let's say you gave an example of a Tomahawk missile, right? Like what percentage of the components, are critical minerals or rare earths for that matter? Like is it 1 or 2%? Is it less than 5%? Is it greater than 10%? Just an idea, like as to how important are like rare earths or magnets when it comes to actually building out a missile.
Yeah, so like I said, for an F-35 fighter jet, it accounts for almost 4% of the total weight,
Wow.
just
Okay.
rare earths and rare earth permanent magnets. But without those rare earths or rare earth permanent magnets, you wouldn't be able to make it, because those permanent magnets are used to make the motors of those
Hmm.
fighter jets or the motors of the submarines. And the higher the temperature requirement of the motor, the greater the content of a heavy rare earth, because that is what increases the temperature sensitivity of the rare earth. So for applications like a submarine or an F-35 jet, you would need a really high temperature, and that's why you would need a higher content of dysprosium, terbium, or these heavy rare earths which are at stake. But also not just that, your missiles, Tomahawk missiles, radars, sonars, lasers, your chemical threat detection, then your smart bomb activation methods, all of these use rare earths. Even though in small quantities, without those, these won't function.
Right. So a lot of the discussion since China put on these, I think that they're supposed to go into effect on December 1st, right? And you can correct me if I'm wrong over here.
More or less. I
More or
mean,
less.
there are different parts of the export control, and different parts of them are going to be like implemented from different timelines. But yeah, by the end of the year, everything is going to be in place.
Right. And so the tussle really seems to be between China and the US over here. Where does Europe stand in all of this? I'm sure they will also be significantly impacted with these new export controls.
Europe is going to be hit the hardest. Like when the export controls happened first in April, European automobile manufacturers were hit the hardest.
Hmm.
And then European defense sector is also going to be hit very hard, because Um, China supplies 99% of these heavy rare earths, but the largest consumers of rare earths in defense is USA and Europe. more than 50% of the demand for rare earths in defense comes from these two like from these two parts of the
Mhm.
world. And these the and these sections, so yeah, Europe does not have a significant upstream or a mining mineral industry because they're very high and very stringent environmental standards in place. Europe has some midstream capacity, which is refining and separating rare earths and critical minerals and making them into magnets. Germany has some magnet manufacturing that happens. There is a new plant that has opened up recently in Estonia, which is going to manufacture magnets. But the the scale at which they're doing is not enough to meet the demand. And yes, there's a lot of funding flow. Yes, Europe is going to become the next big recycling hub,
Mhm.
but that is not happening now. That is going to take some time to happen. It's going to take a couple of years, and to be able to catch up with China and to be a self-sustaining economy, that is going to take decades. I mean, what I was trying to say is that, I mean, yes, they're focusing on building a midstream capacity. They're focusing on building a recycling capacity. The big recycling is a big thing in UK and Europe, but recycling can never replace primary supply. It can never be a substitute for that. It can only complement primary supply.
So, like you mentioned as well that just there are like 3 to 4 bureaucrats, working in some ministry in China that are reviewing the applications that are coming in, right? And just given the broad scope of these export controls, how does China realistically go about enforcing these new rules? Will they be doing it through surprise inspections or end product testing, or are they just relying on the companies to voluntarily disclose, why they'll be using these rare earths and what they'll be using it for? And what if like they identify a company that wasn't playing by these new rules, that maybe understated what they'll be using the rare earths for? What happens to the company then? Are they penalized? Are they put on a blacklist? Is the country that the company associated with also put on a blacklist? Like, what are the implications if somebody is caught not playing by these new rules?
Now, there are two parts to this. I'll come to the second part first, which is related to the second export controls, because that is more about re-importing China's IP, re-importing China's material. Um, we're still yet to find out how exactly they're gonna keep an eye on everyone that is trying to re-import China's material, because that's basically everyone at this
Mm.
point. Um, but when it comes to China's IP, they've been doing that. They've been slowly getting a stranglehold of the entire supply chain for a really long time. This is not a sudden event. This has been happening from a really long time. 2 years ago, China first announced that they will put an export restriction on IP. Now, but what this means this time is that anyone, say for example, is using Chinese technology to separate or to manufacture rare earth permanent magnets. Now that requires upgradation, that requires maintenance, and that is where you need to go back to China to apply for a license if you need to upgrade your equipment, if you need to. Or a lot of companies are dependent on reagents from China. That comes into the picture. Now, coming to back to the first part of the problem, when this first happened in April, the restriction was on anyone who was trying to export from China. And what they've done is there are no more privately owned rare earth companies anymore. At the moment, everything is managed by these two big Chinese rare earth groups, which are ultimately reporting to the state, and they get and the state decides how much these two companies are going to produce rare earths and who they're going to sell it to, and these bigger companies then tell their subsidiaries how much they can produce and how much they cannot. So basically, it's a quota system in place. So anyone who's trying to sell rare earths has to come back to them to get material. and then they have to apply for a license. Yes, there is some liquidity in the spot market, and that's why uh, the prices in the spot market have been volatile since these export controls. But the spot market is also going to, I mean, whatever liquid material is there is also going to get exhausted in some time, right? Because yeah, I mean, yeah, there's not enough stockpile. So ultimately, what China has been doing is getting a stronghold of the entire supply chain from producing to consumption. So they have the visibility on who is producing and where is it going to.
But what
Yeah.
really happens, like if they find a company and that hasn't been playing by the rules, does that company get blacklisted from buying from any of the state-owned enterprises that are supplying rare earths?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's I mean, at the moment, and if we try to talk in China, if we try to get information, when we talk to market participants, they're not allowed to talk.
Right. Okay.
And I mean, they've China has even issued a warning. Say, for example, a country or any company who's trying to stockpile material. So they're going to compare previous export volumes to current export volumes, and if they see a discrepancy, they're going to completely blacklist that company or that country. They've issued that warning.